My grandmother had hands like cracked leather and a voice like a screen door in a windstorm. She never raised it. She never needed to. The day she pressed a single sunflower seed into my palm, my 9-year-old palm, all sticky and uncertain, she folded my fingers around it like she was handing me something that could break, or maybe something that couldn't. So a legacy of strength, she said. I didn't know what legacy meant. I didn't ask. You don't ask women like her to explain themselves. You wait. You watch. You eventually understand, somewhere around age 34, standing in the ruins of something you built with your bare hands, that she wasn't talking about gardening. She was never talking about gardening. What follows is not a comfortable story. It is the story of a man who wore his grief like a second coat, heavy, wrong season, too proud to take it off. It is the story of a woman who had already buried 3 people she loved and still got up before dawn to feed the horses. It is the story of what happens when stubbornness and tenderness collide in the middle of a drought, the human kind and the other kind. I was there for parts of it. I observed the rest. I am not a neutral party. I never claimed to be. If you are waiting for a story where everyone does the right thing at the right time, stop here. But if you have ever stood at the edge of something you almost lost, and felt your heartbeat in your throat like a question you were too afraid to answer head on, this one is for you. The first thing I noticed about Cole Decker was his boots. Not his face, which was weathered in the specific way of men who have spent too many years arguing with the sky. Not his hands rope-scarred, knuckle-thick, the kind that make you wonder what they've held and what they've let go. Not the hat, which was sweat-stained at the brim in that honest, unself-conscious way you can't buy at a western wear store outside of Denver. The boots. They were cracked at the left heel. Someone had repaired it, badly, with what looked like electrical tape wrapped 3 times around. The tape had started to peel. He hadn't fixed it. He'd wrapped more tape over the peel. I remember thinking, this man has been patching himself together for a long time. I was right about that. I was wrong about almost everything else. I should explain how I came to be on the Decker Ranch at all. My name is Priya Anand. I was a research associate at the Center for Rural Sustainability out of Fort Collins, Colorado. My specialty, if you can call a narrow obsession a specialty, was intergenerational land trauma, the measurable psychological and economic cost passed between generations when family farmland is lost. Foreclosed. Sold off in panic. Carved up by development. I kept personal field logs. That is my quirk, if you need one. Notebooks, actual paper ones, because I don't trust myself not to delete the things I need to remember. I had 47 of them in a storage unit in Boulder. My ex-wife said it was a hoarding problem. I said it was a methodology. We were both correct. I arrived at the Decker property on a Tuesday in early October, which in northeastern Colorado means the sun is thin and cold and gives you absolutely no warmth but plenty of light to see by. The grant I was working under required field interviews with 4th-generation or older agricultural families currently in financial distress. Cole Decker qualified. His family had worked this land since 1887. He was 4 months behind on a loan he'd taken to survive a hailstorm that took out 60% of his winter wheat 3 years prior. He had agreed to the interview via a form letter his county agricultural extension office had sent. He had not agreed warmly. "You've got an hour," he said, when I climbed out of my rental car. He was already walking back toward the barn. The ranch was 340 acres of high plains, which sounds enormous until you stand in the middle of it and feel how much sky there is above it and realize the land is just a thin shelf between the dirt and the everything. The house was old. White clapboard that had gone the color of old teeth. A porch that sagged on the east side. A vegetable garden that had been put to bed for winter in the careful, methodical way of someone who fully intends to wake it up again. That detail mattered. I didn't know why yet. I followed Cole into the barn. He didn't wait for me to set up my recorder. He started talking while he checked the water lines running to the horse stalls, 4 horses, all of them the relaxed, heavy-eyed variety that meant they were used to people, and I scrambled to get my notebook out, because the recorder was still in my bag and he was already mid-sentence. My great-grandfather didn't speak English when he broke this ground, he was saying. Came over from somewhere in Germany, nobody remembers exactly where. Name was originally something nobody could pronounce, so they shortened it to Decker, and that was that. He had a wife and 2 kids under 5 and $50 and a land claim, and he put every single thing he had into this ground. He checked a valve. Turned it slightly. Moved to the next stall. My grandfather used to say the land takes everything you give it and gives nothing back until it's ready. He said it like that was wisdom. I used to think it was just him trying to explain why we were always broke. I wrote, framing of scarcity as inherited philosophy. Possible denial mechanism generational loss. I underlined denial and then felt bad about it. What do you think now? I asked. He stopped walking. He turned and looked at me for the first time, actually looked, not the sideways, keep moving glance of a man tolerating an intrusion, and I saw his eyes, which were the color of sky in a drought. Light blue. Dry. Now I think he was right, Cole said. And I think that might be the problem. He didn't explain that. He moved on. I learned, over the next 2 hours, my 1 hour had expanded without either of us acknowledging it, that Cole Decker was 51 years old, had been running the ranch alone since his father's stroke 7 years ago, had a son named Marcus who was 23 and living in Denver doing something with computers that Cole described only as fine, I suppose, and that Cole had been married for 11 years to a woman named Ruth, who had died. He said it that way, Ruth, who had died. Not my late wife. Not my wife, who passed. Ruth, who had died. Present tense of a permanent fact, the way you'd say the well, which dried up, or the east fence, which fell. I wrote it down exactly. I stared at it for a moment. Then, I wrote underneath it, does not use past tense for her. Interesting. How long ago? I asked. 4 years in February. A beat. He was wrapping baling wire around a fence post that had come loose. The wire caught the thin October sun. She's the one who kept the books, he said. I mean, she ran the whole, she had a system. Color-coded. Said I had the instinct for the land and she had the instinct for the numbers, and together we had one whole functional farmer. He yanked the wire tight. Turns out half of something functional is just broken. This is where I should be objective. This is where a good researcher stays inside the frame of the study. I closed my notebook. I'm sorry, I said. He looked at the fence post. It was 4 years ago. Grief doesn't really run on a calendar. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Short. Almost involuntary. No, he said. It really doesn't. The crisis, the one that had landed Cole Decker on my research list, the one that had pushed him to the edge of losing land his family had worked for 135 years, had begun, technically, with the hailstorm. But hailstorms are what they are. They come and they go. What broke Cole wasn't the storm. It was the decision he'd made 6 months after Ruth died, when the grief was still so raw and disorienting that the world felt like he was walking it with someone else's legs. He had refinanced the property to take out operating capital. It was a reasonable decision. Ruth would have run the numbers first, probably built a spreadsheet with 3 scenarios, probably slept on it a week. Cole had done it in an afternoon because he needed something to do that felt like forward motion. The interest rate was variable. Ruth would have caught that. Ruth had said, once, early in their marriage, that variable interest rates were how banks ate farmers alive, one quarterly adjustment at a time. He knew she had said it. He had forgotten it mattered. I signed the papers, he told me, sitting on an overturned bucket in the barn because the afternoon had somehow become early evening and neither of us had stopped talking. Sat right there at Harlan Burke's desk at First AG and signed the papers, and I thought Ruth would have something to say about this, and then I thought, well, she's not here to say it, and I signed anyway. He picked at a piece of hay stuck to his jacket. I have replayed that sentence in my head approximately 11,000 times. The loan had seemed manageable. Then, the rates adjusted. Then, the hail took the wheat. Then, there was a wet spring that rotted 30% of his corn at the roots, and a dry summer that took the rest of his margin, and he was sitting in October with a loan payment due in December that he could not make, and a decision to make that felt, as he put it, like choosing which arm to cut off. He could sell the east parcel, 40 acres of his best dryland wheat ground, to a neighbor who had already expressed interest. That would cover the payment and buy him another year. Or he could refuse. Hold the line. Hope the next crop year was better. Risk losing the whole property if it wasn't. I had heard versions of this story before. I had documented 46 of them. Most of the time, when I reached this point in an interview, the farmer had already made the decision. They were in the process of living with it. My job was to document the aftermath, the economic fracture, the emotional cost, the things that got passed down. Cole hadn't decided yet. December's 8 weeks out, he said. I keep thinking I'll know by November what the right answer is. Do you believe that? He looked at his boots. The electrical tape. The peel. No, he said. I think I'll get to November and I'll still be sitting here not knowing, and then I'll get to December and something will happen. I'll either sell it or I won't. And I won't know why either way. I thought about writing that down. I didn't. What would Ruth say? I asked. The barn went quiet. Outside, one of the horses shifted weight, hooves on packed dirt, a sound like punctuation. She'd say the land is not worth your life, Cole said. She'd say it's just ground. She'd say your grandfather didn't die for an idea. But she'd also wake up at 4:30 and have the coffee on and be out there in it, same as she'd been for 11 years. And I don't think she'd have been able to tell you why either. I stayed for dinner. This was unprofessional. I stayed anyway. He made something that involved canned tomatoes and beef from a local butcher whose name he said with the particular reverence of a man who considers sourcing an ethical act. There was bread from 2 days ago that he toasted in the oven without being asked whether I wanted toast, because obviously you wanted toast. We ate at a kitchen table that had a small crack running across one corner, repaired with wood glue and a strip of copper, actual copper, hammered flat, tacked down careful as surgery. It was beautiful. I almost said so. I didn't want to make it weird. On the wall above the table was a photograph. A woman, mid-30s, standing in a field of wheat, looking not at the camera but at something just past it. Her expression was not a smile exactly. It was something more like certainty. Like she had looked at whatever was off frame and made her peace with it. Cole didn't mention the photograph. I didn't ask. But, somewhere during the second half of the meal, he said, without preamble, she grew sunflowers. I looked up from my plate. Along the whole south fence line. Said the wheat needed something pretty to look at. A pause. I kept the seeds. Haven't planted them since. He said it the way you'd say the well, which dried up. After dinner, he walked me out to my car. The sky had cleared and gone enormous, the way plain sky does at night, all the stars showing off without the competition of altitude. I'll send you the full interview packet when I finish the write-up, I said. Sure. And the grant office might follow up for a secondary, sure. I got my keys out. Stopped. Cole. He waited. The east parcel. Whatever you decide, and I am saying this completely outside my professional capacity, for what it's worth, there is no version of this where you're choosing to fail. You'd be choosing to keep going. That's different. He looked at the dark line of the east pasture. Is it? I didn't have an answer. He hadn't really asked for one. December, he said. And went back inside. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes before I started it. I had 47 notebooks. I had driven 14,000 miles through rural Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, documenting the financial and psychological anatomy of loss. I had interviewed farmers, ranchers, orchardists, people who grew hops and people who grew beets and people who grew things I couldn't name. I had never once not started the engine. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. What does it cost, I wrote, to stay? And then, because I couldn't help it, beneath that, what does it cost to leave? I didn't answer either question. I put the notebook on the passenger seat and drove back to the motel in Yuma with the heater on full and the radio off and the dark of the planes going past on both sides like something enormous holding its breath. 3 days later, I got an email from Cole Decker. It was not long. No subject line. 3 sentences. The sunflower seeds are still in the shed. Ruth used to say you so what you want to leave behind. I've been thinking about that. I read it 4 times. I wrote back, what are you going to do? His reply came the next morning, 7:11 a.m. Same thing I always do. Get up and see what the ground needs. I told myself this was data. I told myself the personal log was methodology. I told myself a lot of things, sitting at my desk in Fort Collins, pulling up Cole Decker's file. The man had been patching himself together with electrical tape for 4 years. He was standing at the edge of a decision that would either save or cost him everything his family had built across 135 years of stubbornness and grief and faith in ground that gave nothing back until it was ready. And he was still up at 4:30. Coffee on. Out in it. I don't know what that is, exactly. I know every clinical term for grief and resilience and post-traumatic adaptation. I have 47 notebooks. But I don't have a word for what Cole Decker was doing. I just know he was doing it. And, somehow, that was the most human thing I had ever documented. I went back in November. I told myself it was for the follow-up data collection required by the grant's second quarter checkpoint. I had a form. 12 questions. Quantitative metrics. Income projections, operational costs, decision timeline. I had filled out the form in the parking lot of a Subway in Akron, Colorado, based on my notes from October, which was obviously a data integrity violation I will not be disclosing to the grant committee. The real reason I went back was the email. You sow what you want to leave behind. I couldn't find where that landed in any of my 47 notebooks. It didn't fit a category. It kept floating to the surface at the worst possible times, driving, trying to sleep, in the middle of a faculty meeting when Dr. Hassan was explaining the new quarterly reporting structure. You sow what you want to leave behind. I needed to know what he meant. I needed to know what he was going to do about it. The day I arrived, there was a grass fire. Not on Cole's property. 3 miles east, on the Halverson place, a leased parcel, no one living there, dry grass that had been standing since August. Someone had reported a lightning strike the night before, though the fire marshal's report would later say probable equipment spark from a tractor someone had been running without a proper spark arrestor. It didn't matter what started it. What mattered was the smoke. I saw it from the highway, a black-brown column going up into a sky that was the particular gray of Plains November, which is not the romantic gray of coastal winters but something flatter and more serious. The smoke sat against that gray like a bruise on paper. I called Cole from the car. He picked up on the first ring. I see it, he said, before I could say anything. Already called it in. Don't come up the driveway, fire road might be blocked. Are you? I'm fine. Hands full. He hung up. I parked on the county road and walked. The wind was coming out of the northeast, which was pushing the fire south and slightly west. Away from Cole's buildings, barely. The Halverson ground and the Decker ground shared a fence line that ran for about 3/4 of a mile along their eastern border, and that fence line had a fire break cut along it, maybe 15 feet wide, dry dirt and short-grazed grass. Cole had done that. I would learn this later. He'd cut that break in October, after the first hard frost, 2 weeks before I arrived the first time. You cut a fire break in October? I said, when I learned this. I cut a fire break every October, he said. Been doing it since my dad had his stroke and couldn't anymore. Why? He looked at me the way you look at someone who was asked a question so basic they've revealed something about themselves. Because it's October, he said. Because the grass is dry. Because fire doesn't care about your plans. When I got to the main gate, Cole was in his truck, driving the fence line at maybe 10 miles an hour, windows down, watching the fire's edge. He had a hand radio on the seat beside him. He had a water tank mounted in the truck bed, a small one, maybe 200 gallons, with a hand pump. 2 other trucks were already working the south edge of the fire. County Volunteer Fire Department, orange vests visible. I stood at the gate and watched Cole work. He moved the truck in a slow, deliberate arc, not away from the fire but parallel to it, watching the fence line the way you'd watch a river watching for where it was going to break its banks. When a section of grass along the break caught a ember and started to smoke, he stopped, got out, moved to the pump, soaked it, got back in. No drama. No wasted motion. The pace of a man who had done emergency repetitions of this in his head so many times that the actual emergency felt like practice. I thought about Ruth's color-coded spreadsheets. I thought about the variable interest rate. Some things you plan for. Some things you cut the brake in October and hope you never need it. The fire was contained by mid-afternoon. It had burned maybe 40 acres of the Halverson lease. No structures. No livestock, there weren't any on that parcel. The fire break had held on Cole's side. There was a scorched section along the top of the fence posts, black as charcoal, but the grass on Cole's ground was untouched. I helped with the mop-up, which mostly meant walking the perimeter with a hand radio and reporting any reignition I saw. I was wearing clothes that were not appropriate for this. I burned a hole in my jacket sleeve with a spark that I didn't notice until it was done. The volunteer fire captain, a woman named Deb Ostergaard, who had the no-nonsense manner of someone who runs emergencies for free in her spare time from running a dairy, told me Cole's break had saved at least 15 acres of his winter wheat. He's been cutting that break for 6-7 years, she said. Some years nothing happens. He cuts it anyway. She said it without sentiment. The sentiment was mine. Cole made coffee at the kitchen table after. Black for him. He found creamer in the back of a cabinet for me that I think had been there since the previous administration. I used it anyway. It wasn't my day to be particular. He had soot on his left arm, a long streak from wrist to elbow, and hadn't noticed or hadn't bothered. I had 14 questions on my form. I asked 0 of them. Marcus called, Cole said, wrapping both hands around his mug. Marcus. The son in Denver. Computers, fine I suppose. He saw the county emergency alert. He called to check. That's good. Cole looked at his mug. He asked if I'd thought more about selling. A pause that was so specifically weighted I could feel it. The whole property. Not just the east parcel. He's got a friend in real estate. Said the market right now. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. He said it like it cost him something. Have you? I said. I'm thinking about it right now, he said. Does that count? This is the moment I should tell you what I was observing clinically. What I was actually observing was a man holding a coffee mug with both hands because it was the right size for both hands, and his son had called from Denver during a fire emergency to ask if he'd thought about selling, and the answer to that question, whatever it was going to determine whether 4 generations of Deckers had a home or a memory. And Cole was thinking about it. In real time. In front of me. Which was either a profound level of trust or a sign that he had been alone for 4 years and I was simply the most present body in the room. I didn't know which. I wrote it down. What he told me, over the next hour, was this. Marcus had grown up on the ranch. He had done what ranch kids do, woke early, fed animals, learned the back 40 before he learned long division, breathed the particular smell of hay and diesel and cold morning like it was his native atmosphere. And then, at 17 he'd gone to a state technology competition with his high school robotics team, and come in second place, and come home changed. Not dramatic. Not rebellious. Just shifted, the way a door shifts when a house settles, it still closes, but not quite flush. He had gone to Colorado State for computer engineering. He had done well. He had gotten a job. He had come home for Christmas and called on birthdays and done all the things a good son does. But the ranch had never been in his hands. Not the way it had been in Cole's. Ruth thought that was fine, Cole said. She said not every generation has to want the same thing. She said legacy isn't a duty. Did you agree? He turned his mug a quarter turn. The soot on his arm caught the kitchen light. I agreed with everything Ruth said, he said. That was just how we worked. She was smarter than me about most things. She was definitely smarter than me about people. A pause. But she's not here to tell me what she thinks about this. He got up and stood at the kitchen window. The smoke from the Halverson fire was still visible, thin now, more gray than black, dispersing into a sky that was going the orange-pink of early sunset. The scorched fence line was visible as a dark stripe across the east pasture. You know what I keep coming back to, he said. He didn't wait for me to answer. She planted those sunflowers the first spring after we bought the place. 3,000 seeds along the south fence, every single one by hand. I asked her why she didn't just plant a cover crop, something practical. She said she was planting what she wanted the land to remember. He watched the smoke. 11 years of sunflowers. 4 years of nothing. The seeds are still in the shed. He turned from the window. His face was doing something I didn't have a clinical term for. Not grief exactly. Grief was the background frequency, the thing running under everything, the way a river runs under ice. This was something else. Something closer to the surface. I think I've been waiting for her to tell me what to plant next, he said. I drove home that night thinking about soot on an arm. About a coffee mug held in both hands. About the seeds still in the shed. About what it means to keep something you can't yet use. Marcus called me. I know. That surprised me too. Cole had apparently given him my card, which I had left on the kitchen table, another professionalism failure I am adding to the list. Marcus had found it and called from Denver at 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was polite. He was precise. He sounded like Cole edited for a different climate. I wanted to ask about the grant, he said. About what it does for families in this situation. I told him. The research, the documentation, the policy advocacy work. Does it save the farms? He said. Straight to it. Very Cole. No, I said. It documents what's lost. It tries to influence policy so fewer are lost in the future. A silence. So it doesn't help my dad. Not directly. No. Another silence. Longer. He's not going to sell, Marcus said. I want you to know I know that. I know him. He's going to go into December and make the payments somehow, sell a truck, sell equipment, sell whatever he has to sell that isn't ground, and he's going to make it through one more year and then have the exact same conversation next December. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with the specific exhaustion of someone who has watched a pattern long enough to know the shape of it. Is that wrong? I asked. I don't know, Marcus said. That's why I'm calling you. I didn't have an answer. I told him that. I told him I had 47 notebooks and 14 years of research, and what I had mostly documented was that people who loved land loved it in ways that were not fully explainable in economic or psychological terms, and that this was both beautiful and costly, and that neither of those things canceled the other out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, he said, he cut a fire break in October. Yes. He cuts it every October. I used to help him when I was a kid. We'd walk the whole line, just the two of us, and he'd explain which way the prevailing wind ran and where the fire would want to go if it got loose. He taught me to think about the land like it had intentions. A pause. I was 12. I thought it was the coolest thing anyone had ever told me. He stopped. I miss that, he said. I miss thinking the land had intentions. I am a researcher. I document things. I measure things. I maintain professional distance and I write things down in notebooks and I believe in evidence-based analysis. I also know that the 12-year-old Marcus Decker, walking a fire break with his father, learning to read the land's intentions, that was a thing being passed down. That was a legacy being sown. Not in sunflower seeds. In the way you walk a field. In the way you learn to think about what you could lose before you lose it. I don't know if Cole will keep the East parcel. I don't know if Marcus will ever come back to the land in any real sense. But I know that Marcus called me at 9:15 on a Tuesday because he was worried about a man who cuts fire breaks in October on the off chance they'll be needed. And I know that worry, the specific shape of it, the care underneath it, that's not something you lose when you move to Denver. That's something you carry. I went back to my car and opened my notebook. I wrote, Cole Decker. Stubborn. Grieving. Careful. I crossed out careful and wrote, prepared. I thought about the sunflower seeds in the shed. 3,000 of them. Everyone by hand. I thought about sowing what you want the land to remember. I sat in the dark with the smell of smoke still in my jacket and the notebook open in my lap, and I thought, she's still here. Ruth, who had died. She's still here in every decision he hasn't made yet. December came. It came the way December always does in northeastern Colorado, not gradually but all at once, a hard freeze overnight, and then, the world was just flat and pale and relentlessly clear, the sky the color of something that has never once considered being warm. I drove back on the 14th. I had not been asked back. I want to be precise about that. I had submitted my quarterly field report. I had documented Cole Decker's case thoroughly enough to satisfy the grant requirements. I had a dozen other properties on my list. I had a faculty meeting on the 16th about something to do with data ethics that I was already composing excuses for in the back of my mind. I drove back anyway. The reason, if I'm being honest, and I have 47 notebooks so I am constitutionally incapable of not being honest, at least on paper, was a voicemail. Cole had called at 6:20 a.m., which was very Cole-appropriate, and said, Priya. It's Cole Decker. I made a decision. Thought you should know. He hadn't said what the decision was. Just. Thought you should know. Like I was a person who needed to know. Like the information had weight that required sharing. I listened to that voicemail twice in the parking lot of my building, standing in the cold with my coffee going lukewarm in my hand, and then I got in my car. The driveway at the Decker place had been plowed. The cattle guard was clear. The cottonwoods along the east fence line had dropped every leaf and stood the way bare trees do in December, frank, articulate, nothing left to perform. Cole's truck was parked by the barn. A second vehicle was there I didn't recognize. A Subaru with a Denver plates and a parking permit from a tech campus I couldn't read from a distance. Marcus. Marcus was here. I almost turned around. I am not a member of this family. I am not part of this story in any way that could be called legitimate. I had one authorized interview, for unauthorized cups of coffee, and a burned jacket sleeve. I parked and got out. They were in the barn. Not arguing, I want to be clear about that. The scene I walked into was two men standing on opposite sides of a work table, which had spread across it a series of papers, and the tension between them was not the hot tension of a fight but the pressurized silence of people who have already said the hard things and are now standing in what remains. Marcus looked like Cole 25 years ago, or what I imagined that looked like, leaner, sharper around the jaw, wearing a fleece jacket that was designed for outdoor activities but had clearly never been near any. He had Cole's eyes, that particular dry sky blue. He looked at me. You're the researcher, he said. Priya, I said. Sorry to intrude. You're not intruding. Cole hadn't looked up from the papers. Come in. What was on the table? The loan documents. Spreadsheets, printed, which suggested they'd been made somewhere else and brought here, which meant Marcus had printed them, which meant Marcus had prepared for this conversation. Financial projections. A parcel map with the East 40 marked in red. And one other thing. A seed catalog. Open to a page of sunflowers. Cole had made the payment. That was the decision in the voicemail. That was what he'd thought I should know. He'd sold the tractor. Not the good one, the older one, the one he'd been nursing along on parts and improvised repairs for 6 years, the one his father had bought the year Cole had turned 18 and started working the land in any real capacity. He'd sold it to Deb Ostergaard's husband, who had a small equipment resale operation out of Yuma, for enough to cover the December payment with $300 left over. The tractor, I said. It was the right size of thing to sell, he said. Not the land. Not the horses. Not anything I can't eventually replace. He said it like it was obvious. Was it? I asked. Obvious? He looked at the parcel map. It was the morning after the fire, he said. I woke up at 4 and I couldn't go back to sleep. So I made coffee and I sat right here and I made a list. Things I own. Things I need. Things I can let go of. He tapped the table. The tractor was on the third list. Marcus was quiet during this. He was the kind of quiet where you can tell the quiet is doing something, not emptiness but process, something working behind the eyes. I found the tractor in the list, he said, after a moment. I looked at him. He kept a running inventory, Marcus explained. Everything on the property, condition, estimated value. Mom started it, actually. She had a spreadsheet, color-coded, Cole said. Color-coded. I found it on the old laptop. He'd been updating it. Marcus said this in a way I couldn't fully read, not accusatory, not admiring exactly, something more private than either. I didn't know he was still keeping it. Cole said nothing. I drove up yesterday, Marcus said, because I thought I was coming to talk him out of losing the place. I had numbers. I had a thing I was going to say about sunk cost fallacy and, emotional, he stopped. Rubbed the back of his neck. I had a whole thing. He drove 4 hours, Cole said. In December. I had a whole thing, Marcus repeated. What Marcus had found, when he'd arrived and they'd actually sat down together for the first time in, Cole said 2 years, Marcus said 18 months, neither of them pushed the discrepancy, was not a man in denial. He found a man who had been making a list. Who had been thinking, slowly and carefully and, in the specific language of a person who cuts fire breaks and, color-codes spreadsheets and, keeps a running inventory of everything he owns and, everything he needs and, everything he can let go of, about what was worth keeping. Marcus had brought his numbers. Cole had brought his list. They had been on the table for 6 hours before I arrived. Show her, Cole said. Marcus looked at him. The proposal. Show her. The proposal, which Marcus had drafted, and which Cole had apparently been reading since the previous evening, was not a small thing. Marcus was going to move back. Not full-time, not immediately. He had a job. He had a life in Denver that would require disentangling in a way that would take months, maybe a year. But, the job was remote, had always been remote, he'd never actually needed to be in Denver, he'd just needed a reason to be somewhere else, and he was no longer sure he had one. The proposal was, he would take over the financial management. The spreadsheets, the planning, the part that Ruth had always done. He would do it from here, alongside Cole, building toward a transition that might take several years but would not require Cole to sell anything he didn't want to sell or make any more 4 a.m. coffee and inventory calculations alone. It was careful and specific and thoroughly researched. It was, I realized, reading it, the thing a 12-year-old learns when his father teaches him to read the land's intentions. He'd learned it. He'd just been carrying it somewhere else. Why now? I asked Marcus. What changed? He looked at the table. At the seed catalog. I called him after the fire, he said. And he was fine. He was just fine. He'd handled it, he had the brake cut, nobody lost anything that mattered. And I realized I was sitting in Denver refreshing a county emergency alert website at 11 p.m. because I was terrified. He looked up. And I thought, what am I doing? What am I protecting by being there? I don't even a pause. I don't love Denver. I like it fine. But I don't love it. He gestured, broadly, at the barn. "I love this," he said. "I've always loved this. I just didn't know what to do with that." Cole picked up the seed catalog. He turned it over in his hands once. "Ruth used to say you don't plant sunflowers for yourself," he said. "They're too tall. You can't see the face of a sunflower if you're standing right underneath it. You plant them so the person coming toward you on the road can see them from a mile away." He set the catalog down. "I've been thinking about that all fall. About who I'm planting for." He looked at Marcus. "Not sentimental. Not soft. Just direct, in the way of men who have learned that the direct way costs less." "Turns out I was waiting for you to show back up," he said. "Didn't know that was what I was waiting for." Marcus's jaw did something small and involuntary. "You could have called," he said. His voice had gone a register lower. "So could you," Cole said. "This is where I should leave. Professionally, personally, in every way that makes sense, this is a family conversation. I am a researcher with a burn jacket and no legitimate reason to be in this barn." I started putting on my coat. "Stay," Cole said. "Cole, this is stay for dinner," he said. "Marcus is staying. He made a lasagna." A pause. "He brought a lasagna from Denver." Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. "I didn't know what else to bring." "You brought a lasagna," Cole said, and the way he said it was not teasing, exactly. It was something more like relief. The particular relief of a man who has been setting one place at the kitchen table for 4 years and is going to set 3 tonight. I put my coat back on my lap. "All right," I said. We ate at the kitchen table with the copper-patched crack and the photograph of Ruth on the wall. Marcus had made an extremely competent lasagna, layers tight and deliberate, like a man who approaches cooking the way he approaches spreadsheets. Cole ate 2 large servings without comment, which I took as the highest possible compliment. The conversation moved the way conversations do when people are recalibrating after something hard, carefully, with deliberate attention to safe ground, occasionally veering toward the real thing and, then, backing off. Marcus talked about Denver. His apartment, the size of which he described as a studio, technically, but the landlord used the word studio pretty liberally. His job, which involved something about distributed systems that I did not fully follow but which Marcus described with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved it. "That's good," Cole said. "Whatever it is." "It's good," Marcus confirmed. "It's also something I can do from anywhere." Cole nodded. The kind of nod that means, heard, logged, not ready to say what I think about it yet. "The east pasture is going to need reseeding in March," Cole said, changing the subject without changing the subject. "Ground's been stressed from the drought. I've been thinking about a mixed native grass blend. Deeper root systems. Better for drought resilience." Marcus looked at him. "I did some research," Cole said, slightly defensive. "I read things." "I know you read things," Marcus said. "The internet says I know what the internet says, Dad, I work on the internet." They argued about grass seed varieties for 20 minutes with a specificity that told me this was not actually about grass seed. It was 2 people finding the familiar language. The one you use when you're from the same place. The argument was, I'm still here. Are you still here? I ate lasagna and wrote nothing down. Some things don't need to be documented. After dinner, Cole went to the shed. He came back with a small glass jar, sealed with a rubber lid, the kind you'd use for leftover bacon grease or hardware screws. Inside, seeds. Small, flat, pale sunflower seeds, slightly papery at the edges, the way stored seeds go. He set them in the center of the table. Marcus looked at them. I looked at them. "I've been carrying these for 4 years," Cole said. "I think it's time." Marcus picked up the jar. Turned it over once, the same way Cole had turned the seed catalog, hands learning a weight. "In March," he said. "In spring," Cole said. "When the ground's ready." Marcus set the jar back down carefully. On the table between them, exactly in the center, like something that had been agreed upon. Along the south fence? Marcus said. Where else? Cole said. I drove back to Fort Collins that night along a highway that was completely empty, just the headlights and the dark and the cold stars going past, and I thought about what I had watched. I have documented 47 cases of intergenerational land trauma. I have measured the psychological cost of loss across generations. I have written about the things that get broken and the things that get inherited and the difficulty of distinguishing between the two. What I don't have a data point for is this: a jar of sunflower seeds on a kitchen table. A father who kept the seeds for 4 years because he didn't yet know who he was keeping them for. A son who drove 4 hours in December with a lasagna and a spreadsheet and discovered he'd been carrying a 12-year-old's memory of fire breaks and intentions all along. The ground gives nothing back until it's ready. Then, it gives everything. I submitted my final field report in January. Cole Decker, case number 48, northeastern Colorado. 4th generation agricultural family. Financial distress, variable loan, hailstorm damage, drought losses. Decision outcome, property retained. Operational restructure initiated. 14 questions answered. Quantitative metrics recorded. And, then, at the bottom of the supplementary notes field, where the grant guidelines specifically request any additional contextual observations relevant to case outcome, I wrote, planted sunflowers in March. South fence line. 3,000 seeds, by hand. The grant committee will not know what to do with that. That's fine. Some things aren't for committees. I have a 48th notebook now. The first entry is not a data point. It is something Ruth said, as reported by Cole, which I do not believe qualifies as primary source material but, which I have decided to document anyway. Methodology be damned, you sow what you want to leave behind. I have been thinking about what that means for a long time. I think it means, legacy is not what you build. Legacy is what you choose to pass forward, knowing you won't be there to see it fully grow. I think it means, the seeds in the shed were never really dormant. They were just waiting for the right season. And, I think I cannot prove this, I have no data for it, I am writing it in a paper notebook that no one will ever grade. I think Ruth knew that. I think she planted 3,000 sunflowers along the south fence so that her husband and her son, standing in a barn in December 4 years after she was gone, would still be able to feel the direction of the wind. Would still know which way was south. Would still know where home was, even in the burning season. Even when they couldn't quite see each other yet. The sunflowers came up in May. Marcus sent me a photograph. 6 feet tall, every single one, faces turned toward the road.